Good morning and welcome to our lecture on integrative negotiation in the Canadian context. Today, we'll explore how Canada's unique political, cultural, and economic landscape shapes negotiation practices that prioritize value creation over zero-sum competition. The concept of expanding the pie is central to Canada's approach, reconciling diverse interests through collaboration. We'll examine theoretical foundations, practical applications, and case studies, with a special focus on Indigenous perspectives and Canada's federal system. By the end, you'll understand how to apply integrative negotiation principles in sectors like business, healthcare, and environmental policy. Canada's multicultural society and federal structure make it a rich laboratory for studying collaborative solutions. Let's begin with the foundations of integrative negotiation, exploring how Canada adapts global principles to its unique context. Let's start with the foundations of integrative negotiation in Canada, which set the stage for collaborative value creation. Unlike distributive negotiations, where parties compete over a fixed pie, integrative negotiation seeks mutual gains, rooted in game theory and conflict resolution. Canada adapts principles from the Harvard Negotiation Project, emphasizing interests over positions. For example, in a 2018 Toronto labor dispute, focusing on workers' interest in job security rather than fixed wage demands led to a flexible hours agreement. Active listening, a hallmark of Canadian negotiation culture, fosters trust, especially in multicultural settings like Quebec or Indigenous communities. Preserving relationships is critical in Canada's long-term business and policy agreements. Research by Canadian scholars like Brett, 2014, highlights how these principles drive success in trade and labor sectors. The Government of Canada's 2019 trade negotiations with the EU show how interest-based approaches create value. Challenges include navigating diverse stakeholder priorities, but opportunities arise from Canada's collaborative ethos. For students, key takeaways include prioritizing interests, practicing active listening, and building trust. Next, we'll explore how Canada's multicultural society shapes negotiation styles. Building on the foundations, let's examine how cultural dimensions shape Canadian negotiations. Canada's multicultural society demands adaptive negotiation styles, blending diverse perspectives. Indigenous circular approaches, emphasizing consensus and storytelling, contrast with linear Western models focused on outcomes. For example, in a 2020 Manitoba land agreement, Indigenous negotiators used storytelling to align interests, creating a sustainable deal. Quebec's distinct culture, rooted in civil law and French language requirements, demands formal, respectful approaches, as seen in a 2019 retail contract negotiation. Politeness norms and indirect communication, common in Canada, require active listening to uncover interests. Regional variations, direct in Ontario, collaborative in British Columbia, add complexity. Bilingual considerations in federal negotiations, like those under USMCA, require linguistic precision. Research by LeBaron underscores cultural sensitivity's role in success. Challenges include misinterpreting cultural cues, but opportunities lie in leveraging diversity for creative solutions. For students, adapt communication styles, respect cultural protocols, and research regional norms. Next, we'll explore Canada's approach to value creation in negotiations. Following cultural dimensions, let's explore Canada's approach to value creation, central to integrative negotiation. Unlike dividing a fixed pie, Canada emphasizes expanding resources through creative solutions. Package deals, common in trade negotiations like CETA, combine issues like tariffs and labor mobility to benefit all parties. Federal-provincial disputes, such as healthcare funding, use creative problem-solving to balance budgets and services. Incorporating indigenous values, like environmental stewardship, enhances resource negotiations, as seen in a 2021 Alberta pipeline deal. Multi-stakeholder approaches in environmental agreements, like carbon pricing, align diverse interests. Long-term relationship building, a Canadian priority, ensures sustainable deals. Research by Lax and Sabinius, 2006, highlights Canada's success in complex negotiations. Challenges include coordinating multiple stakeholders, but opportunities arise from Canada's collaborative tradition. For students, focus on creative options, stakeholder inclusion, and relationship building. Next, we'll discuss key principles for expanding the pie in Canada. Continuing our discussion, let's focus on key principles for expanding the pie in Canadian negotiations, drawn from the Harvard Negotiation Project. Separating people from the problem fosters collaboration, as seen in a 2019 Ontario labor dispute where personal respect led to compromise. Focusing on interests, not positions, uncovers shared goals, like job security over wage demands. Generating options for mutual gain, such as flexible benefits, creates value. Using objective criteria, like industry benchmarks, ensures fairness, as in a 2020 Quebec supplier contract. Building trust through transparency aligns with Canada's ethical standards, while information sharing, as in USMCA talks, expands possibilities. Research by Fisher et al., 2011, underscores these principles' effectiveness in Canada. Challenges include overcoming positional bargaining, but opportunities lie in collaborative frameworks. For students, prioritize interests, use data-driven criteria, and foster trust. Next, we'll explore Indigenous perspectives on integrative negotiation. Building on key principles, let's examine Indigenous perspectives on integrative negotiation, vital in Canada's context. Indigenous approaches favor circular processes, emphasizing consensus over linear, outcome-driven models. A holistic approach considers community and environmental impacts, as seen in a 2021 Saskatchewan land claim where cultural values shaped agreements. Storytelling, a key tool, builds trust, as in Haida-Gwe negotiations. Consensus-based decision-making ensures all voices are heard, contrasting with Western competition. Long-term relationship focus aligns with Canada's collaborative ethos, while traditional knowledge informs sustainable solutions. The Government of Canada's 2021 Indigenous Guidelines emphasize these principles. Challenges include bridging cultural differences, but opportunities arise from inclusive dialogue. For students, learn Indigenous protocols, value storytelling, and prioritize consensus. Next, we'll explore federal-provincial negotiations through Canadian case studies. Following Indigenous perspectives, let's explore federal-provincial negotiations, a cornerstone of Canada's federal system. These negotiations, like healthcare funding agreements, require balancing regional interests. For example, a 2020 healthcare deal used package deals to align federal and provincial priorities, expanding resources. Equalization payment negotiations address economic disparities, using objective criteria like GDP data. Environmental policy coordination, such as carbon pricing, involves multi-stakeholder dialogue. Infrastructure deals, like Ontario's transit projects, prioritize long-term benefits. Interprovincial trade barriers, addressed in CFTA, require creative solutions. Pandemic response coordination in 2020 showed collaborative problem-solving. Research by Mnookin et al., 2000, highlights Canada's integrative success. Challenges include regional tensions, but opportunities lie in shared goals. For students, study stakeholder interests and use data-driven approaches. Next, we'll examine business sector applications in Canada. Moving to the business sector, let's explore how integrative negotiation applies in Canadian industries. Labor management bargaining, like a 2019 auto sector deal, uses interest-based approaches to balance wages and productivity. Mergers and acquisitions, such as a 2021 Toronto Tech merger, create value through shared innovation goals. Supply chain partnerships, like those in Alberta's energy sector, rely on long-term trust. Joint ventures, such as BC's green tech projects, incorporate environmental values. Corporate social responsibility negotiations align with Canada's ethical standards, while startup investment deals, like Vancouver's tech accelerators, use creative financing. Research by Salakis highlights Canada's collaborative business culture. Challenges include aligning diverse corporate goals, but opportunities arise from shared value creation. For students, focus on interests and build long-term partnerships. Next, we'll dive into labor management negotiations in detail. Continuing from business applications, let's focus on labor management negotiations, a key area in Canada's unionized economy. Canada's history of cooperative labor relations, rooted in post-World War II agreements, emphasizes collaboration. Mediation, as in a 2018 Ontario teachers' dispute, resolves conflicts through neutral facilitators. Integrative approaches in the auto sector, like CAW Unifer's 2020 negotiations, balanced wages and job security. Public sector innovations, such as flexible benefits, create value. Changing labor laws, like Ontario's Bill 124, challenge negotiations, while the gig economy raises new issues, like worker classification. Research by Brett, 2014, highlights mediation's role in success. Challenges include legal constraints, but opportunities lie in collaborative frameworks. For students, study mediation techniques and labor laws to navigate these talks. Next, we'll explore environmental negotiations in Canada. Following labor negotiations, let's examine environmental negotiations, critical in Canada's resource-driven economy. Climate change policy, like the 2016 Pan-Canadian Framework, uses multi-stakeholder dialogue to balance economic and environmental interests. Indigenous land use agreements, such as a 2021 BC forestry deal, incorporate traditional knowledge. Resource extraction negotiations, like Alberta's oil sands, require creative solutions to address environmental concerns. Water rights disputes in Manitoba involve Indigenous consensus building. Conservation area designations and carbon pricing, as in Ontario, use objective criteria like scientific data. Research by Hoffman, 2011, highlights Canada's integrative environmental approach. Challenges include stakeholder conflicts, but opportunities arise from shared sustainability goals. For students, prioritize environmental data and Indigenous perspectives. Next, we'll explore healthcare sector negotiations. Moving to healthcare, let's explore negotiations in Canada's universal healthcare system. Federal-provincial funding agreements, like the 2020 Health Accord, use package deals to balance budgets and services. Physician compensation negotiations in Ontario focus on workload and pay equity. Pharmaceutical pricing deals, like those with global firms, use objective criteria like cost-effectiveness data. Hospital labor contracts, as in a 2019 Quebec dispute, emphasize job security. Medical technology procurement and pandemic response coordination, like vaccine rollouts, require multi-stakeholder collaboration. Research by Mnuchin et al., 2000, highlights Canada's integrative healthcare approach. Challenges include budget constraints, but opportunities lie in shared public health goals. For students, study healthcare economics and stakeholder interests. Next, we'll discuss collaborative approaches in education. Continuing our sector focus, let's explore collaborative approaches in Canada's education sector. University-industry partnerships, like a 2021 Toronto Tech Research deal, create value through shared innovation. Curriculum development negotiations balance stakeholder input, as in Quebec's 2019 reforms. Student union agreements, like those in BC, address tuition and services. International education collaborations, such as study abroad programs, expand opportunities. Indigenous education initiatives, like Manitoba's 2020 programs, incorporate cultural values. Online learning platform development, accelerated by the pandemic, requires technical and pedagogical alignment. Research by Susskind and Field, 2016, highlights Canada's collaborative education model. Challenges include funding disputes, but opportunities lie in shared educational goals. For students, focus on stakeholder engagement and cultural sensitivity. Next, we'll examine technology sector partnerships. Following education, let's explore technology sector partnerships, vital in Canada's innovation-driven economy. Startup accelerator negotiations, like Vancouver's 2021 programs, align funding and mentorship. Venture capital deals, such as Toronto's tech investments, balance risk and reward. Tech transfer agreements in universities create shared value. AI ethics framework development, like Canada's 2020 guidelines, involves multi-stakeholder dialogue. Cybersecurity cooperation and digital infrastructure partnerships, like 5G rollouts, require trust and data security. Research by Salakis highlights Canada's integrative tech approach. Challenges include intellectual property disputes, but opportunities lie in collaborative innovation. For students, study tech trends and ethical considerations. Next, we'll explore the legal framework for integrative negotiation. Moving to the legal framework, let's examine how Canada's laws support integrative negotiation. Mediation and arbitration laws, like Ontario's Arbitration Act, facilitate collaborative resolutions. Collaborative law practices, common in family disputes, emphasize mutual gain. Alternative dispute resolution (ADR) mechanisms, like BC's mediation programs, reduce conflict. Court-annexed negotiation programs streamline disputes, while Indigenous justice approaches, like restorative circles, prioritize consensus. International commercial arbitration, as in CETA disputes, aligns with Canada's trade goals. Research by LeBaron highlights Canada's progressive ADR framework. Challenges include legal complexity, but opportunities lie in structured collaboration. For students, study ADR laws and Indigenous justice principles. Next, we'll discuss ethical considerations in negotiations. Following the legal framework, let's explore ethical considerations, central to Canada's integrity-driven negotiation culture. Power imbalance mitigation, as in a 2020 Indigenous land deal, ensures fair dialogue. Transparency and disclosure, required under securities laws, build trust, as seen in a Toronto financial deal. Conflict of interest management uses third-party mediators. Cultural sensitivity protocols, especially with Indigenous partners, respect historical contexts. Environmental and social impact assessments, like those in BC's forestry sector, align with Canada's values. Research by Susskind and Field, 2016, highlights Canada's ethical negotiation standards. Challenges include balancing transparency with strategy, but opportunities lie in trust building. For students, prioritize ethics and cultural respect. Next, we'll discuss measuring success in integrative negotiations. Continuing our discussion, let's explore how to measure success in Canadian integrative negotiations. Quantitative metrics, like cost savings in a 2020 trade deal, track value creation. Qualitative methods, such as stakeholder feedback, assess trust. Long-term relationship outcomes, as in indigenous agreements, prioritize sustainability. Implementation success rates, like policy adoption in healthcare, gauge effectiveness. Stakeholder satisfaction, measured through surveys, reflects collaboration quality. Comparative analysis with distributive approaches shows integrative method superiority in Canada, as per Brett, 2014. Challenges include quantifying intangibles, but opportunities lie in comprehensive metrics. For students, use mixed methods to evaluate outcomes. Next, we'll examine the NAFTA renegotiation case study to see these principles in action. Let's apply our concepts to the NAFTA renegotiation, a landmark case in Canadian integrative negotiation. The issue involved complex multi-party talks under USMCA, 2018, with Canada, the US, and Mexico holding divergent interests on tariffs and labor. Canada's action was to implement an integrative framework, using facilitated dialogue to focus on interests like market access and job security. The outcome was a consensus solution, expanding value through trade concessions and labor protections. For students, this case highlights Canada's federal system and trade priorities, requiring research into USMCA provisions. Key principles like interest-based negotiation and transparency drove success, but challenges included political pressures. Lessons include researching trade data, fostering dialogue, and balancing stakeholder interests. This case shows how Canada creates value in global talks. Next, we'll explore the Haida Gwaii Indigenous Land Claims case. Continuing with case studies, let's examine the Haida Gwaii Land Claims case, a pivotal example of Indigenous integrative negotiation. The issue involved divergent interests between the Haida Nation, BC government, and industry over land use in 2010. The action was a facilitated dialogue framework, incorporating Indigenous circular processes and storytelling to align environmental and economic interests. The outcome was a consensus solution, creating a co-management agreement that expanded value through sustainable forestry and cultural preservation. For students, this case underscores Canada's Indigenous consultation requirements and cultural sensitivity, as per 2021 government guidelines. Challenges included historical mistrust, but principles like consensus building and transparency succeeded. Lessons include respecting Indigenous protocols, using storytelling, and prioritizing long-term relationships. This case illustrates Canada's unique approach to Indigenous negotiations. Next, we'll explore the CAW Unifor auto sector case. Following Haida Gwaii, let's explore the CAW Unifor auto sector negotiations, a key case in Canada's labor landscape. In 2020, CAW Unifor and automakers faced divergent interests over wages, benefits, and job security in Ontario. The action was an integrative framework with facilitated dialogue, focusing on interests like worker stability and company profitability. The outcome was a consensus agreement, expanding value through flexible schedules and training programs. For students, this case reflects Canada's cooperative labor tradition and union dynamics, requiring research into labor laws like Ontario's Employment Standards Act. Challenges included economic pressures, but principles like interest-based negotiation and mediation succeeded. Lessons include studying industry benchmarks, fostering collaboration, and addressing worker interests. This case highlights Canada's labor negotiation strengths. Next, we'll examine Canada's role in the Paris Agreement. Continuing our case studies, let's examine Canada's role in the 2015 Paris Agreement, a global environmental negotiation. The issue involved divergent interests among nations on emissions targets and funding. Canada's action was to implement an integrative framework, using facilitated dialogue to align economic and environmental goals. The outcome was a consensus solution, with Canada committing to emissions reductions and climate funding, expanding value globally. For students, this case highlights Canada's environmental leadership and federal-provincial coordination, as seen in the Pan-Canadian framework. Challenges included balancing energy interests, but principles like objective criteria and multi-stakeholder dialogue succeeded. Lessons include researching climate data, engaging stakeholders, and prioritizing sustainability. This case shows Canada's global integrative approach. Next, we'll explore healthcare funding negotiations. Our final case study examines federal-provincial healthcare funding negotiations, critical in Canada's universal system. In 2020, provinces and the federal government faced divergent interests over funding levels and service priorities. The action was an integrative framework with facilitated dialogue, focusing on shared interests like patient care quality. The outcome was a consensus agreement, expanding value through increased transfers and mental health funding. For students, this case reflects Canada's federal complexity and healthcare priorities, requiring research into budget data and provincial needs. Challenges included fiscal constraints, but principles like package deals and transparency succeeded. Lessons include studying healthcare economics, engaging diverse stakeholders, and prioritizing public welfare. This case underscores Canada's collaborative healthcare approach. Next, we'll review references to conclude our lecture. As we conclude, let's review the references grounding our lecture on integrative negotiation in Canada. Fisher et al.'s Getting to Yes emphasizes interest-based negotiation, shaping Canada's collaborative culture. Lax and Sabinius's 3D negotiation offers strategies for complex deals, as seen in trade agreements. Salakis the Global Negotiator addresses multicultural dynamics, vital in Canada. The Government of Canada's 2021 Indigenous Guidelines inform land claim negotiations. Hoffman's work highlights Canada's environmental negotiation success. Nukin et al.'s Beyond Winning supports multi-party frameworks, while LeBaron's cultural insights and Susskind and Field's public engagement strategies align with Canada's practices. For students, explore these for deeper insights into Canada's integrative approach, from trade to Indigenous negotiations. Thank you for your attention.